How Mossad dragged the architect of terror out of his hole like a coward. Before we descend into the shadows of international espionage and the cold precision of the world's most feared intelligence agency, make sure you hit that subscribe button. We are exposing the operations that governments deny and the machinery of power that operates in perpetual silence. Turn on notifications so you never miss the next buried file we uncover. In the sanitized, fluorescent-lit corridors of Tel Aviv's intelligence headquarters, there exists a ledger that few are permitted to see. It is not a digital file, vulnerable to hackers or leaks, but a physical document, heavy with the weight of history and consequence. They call it the Red Page. To have your name inscribed upon it is not a legal indictment, it is a conclusion. It means that the debate is over. It means that the bureaucracy of the state has finished its deliberations, the lawyers have signed off on the international law implications, and the Prime Minister has given the nod. It means you are already gone. You just haven't stopped breathing yet. For 3 years, the name at the top of that page was Ibrahim al-Majid. To the world, he was a phantom, a whisper in the back rooms of Beirut and Damascus. To the newspapers, he was the engineer, a man who didn't plant bombs, but built the networks that moved them. But to the analysts in the northern suburbs of Tel Aviv, he was the architect. He didn't pull triggers. He treated violence as a logistics problem. He viewed the conflict not with the heat of religious fervor, but with the cold, mathematical detachment of an actuary. He understood that passion burns out, but infrastructure, financial channels, smuggling routes, safe houses, lasts forever. Al-Majid had learned the most important lesson of modern warfare. Invisibility is the only armor that works. He had watched his predecessors die because they loved the spotlight. He saw how Fatih Shakaki was taken out in Malta because he felt safe enough to walk the streets. He studied the elimination of the Hamas commander on the train to Rome, noting how a simple pattern of travel became a death sentence. So, the architect built himself a hole, not a literal cave in the mountains, but a fortress of anonymity buried deep within a European capital, shielded by layers of cutouts, false identities, and a complete digital blackout. He believed he was untouchable. He believed that by removing himself from the operational front lines, he had removed himself from the target list. He was wrong. The Red Page has no expiration date. The decision to activate the operation came on a Tuesday evening. The intelligence had trickled in over months. A fragment of a wire transfer in Cyprus, a grainy surveillance photo from a train station in Vienna, a courier intercepted in Jordan carrying encrypted notes sewn into the lining of his shoe. It wasn't much, but for the specialists of the Caesarea unit, Mossad's elite deep-cover operatives, it was a scent. Caesarea operatives are not like the spies in the movies. They don't wear tuxedos and they don't drive Aston Martins. They look like the person standing next to you in the elevator, the tourist fumbling with a map, the tennis player waiting for a court. They are trained to be unremarkable. They live in the space between myth and reality, under assumed identities that have been backstopped with years of false history. When the order came down, the team didn't high-five. There was no dramatic music. There was just the quiet shuffling of travel documents and the packing of bags. The mission was designated Operation Iron Net. The objective was not just neutralization. The architect had become a symbol of impunity. He mocked the reach of the agency by surviving year after year. The directive from the top was clear. Do not just silence him. Drag him out. Expose the fear behind the mastermind. Show the world that even the deepest hole has a bottom. The hunt for Ibrahim al-Majid did not begin with a gun. It began with a mistake. The architect was disciplined, bordering on obsessive. He avoided phones, never slept in the same bed for more than 3 nights in a row during transit, and communicated only through a system of dead drops and coded signals that would have impressed the KGB. But every system has a flaw, and usually, that flaw is human connection. Al-Majid had a weakness, one that the psychological profilers in Tel Aviv had flagged years ago. It wasn't money, and it wasn't ideology. It was a specific type of loneliness that comes from living a life where you can trust no one. He had cut off contact with his family. He had no permanent friends. But he had a penchant for luxury, a desire to live comfortably while he orchestrated chaos for others. He liked expensive European suits, high-end electronics, and the quiet comfort of 5-star hotels. The break came from a courier known as the Walker. The Walker was a low-level functionary in the architect's logistics network, a man responsible for moving cash between banks in Zurich and safe houses in Eastern Europe. He was careful, but he was also greedy. Mossad surveillance teams in Vienna noticed a pattern. The Walker was skimming. Small amounts, fractions of pennies on the dollar, but enough to buy a lifestyle he shouldn't have been able to afford. The agency didn't arrest him. That would have been clumsy. Instead, they watched. They watched him buy a new watch. They watched him dine in restaurants that were slightly too expensive for his cover story. And then, they watched him make a detour to a quiet residential district in Brussels, a neighborhood of leafy streets and high walls, the kind of place where diplomats and retired bankers lived to avoid attention. The Walker dropped an envelope in a specific trash bin in a public park. It was a classic dead drop. An hour later, a woman walked by. She was nondescript, wearing a jogging suit, looking like any other health-conscious European. She stopped to tie her shoe, retrieved the envelope, and vanished into the metro system. The surveillance team, operating under the cover of a documentary film crew shooting B-roll of the city, tracked her. They didn't intercept her. They let her run. She led them not to a terrorist training camp, but to a high-end apartment complex in a different city entirely. Paris. The apartment was a fortress. Top-floor penthouse, private elevator, reinforced doors. It was leased to a shell company registered in Panama, paid for by accounts linked to a charity in South America. It was a paper maze designed to hide the occupant, but the analysts saw through the fog. The security protocols were too high for a businessman. The food deliveries were too specific. Halal meals prepared by high-end chefs, delivered by a service that required no face-to-face interaction. This was the hole. The architect was inside. The realization sent a jolt of electricity through the operations room in Tel Aviv. They had found the unfindable man, but finding him was the easy part. Getting him out without turning a quiet Parisian street into a war zone was the challenge. The French intelligence services were notoriously protective of their sovereignty. If Mossad caused a scene, if they left a mess like they had in Lillehammer decades ago, or in the botched attempt in Amman, the diplomatic fallout would be catastrophic. This had to be surgical. It had to be silent. It had to be a ghost operation. Paris in the autumn is a city of gray skies and wet pavement, a perfect backdrop for men and women who prefer to work in the rain. Operation Iron Net began its deployment phase with the arrival of the gladiators, the Kaidan unit operatives. They didn't arrive together. That would trigger the pattern recognition algorithms of airport security. First came Simon, landing at Charles de Gaulle on a flight from Toronto. His passport identified him as a Canadian software engineer attending a tech conference. His luggage contained nothing suspicious, just clothes and a laptop that was exactly what it appeared to be. Next was Sarah, arriving by train from London. She was posing as a travel blogger, her phone full of photos of cafes and monuments. She checked into a boutique hotel in the Marais district, far from the target location. Then came the logistics team. David and Michael drove a rental van across the border from Germany, carrying equipment that couldn't fly, high-powered listening devices, defeat tech for electronic locks, and the specialized medical kits that are the signature of a clean extraction. They established a forward command post in a rented apartment in the 11th arrondissement, a safe distance from the target but close enough for rapid response. The apartment was leased under the name of a Belgian businessman who didn't exist, paid for with a credit card issued by a bank that was actually a front for the agency. Inside the safe house, the atmosphere was tense. The team leader, a veteran of the Dubai operation named Eitan, briefed the squad. He pinned a floor plan to the wall. It was the architect's penthouse. "We have a problem," Eitan said, his voice low. "The target is paranoid. He doesn't leave the apartment. Food is delivered to the lobby and brought up by the concierge. He has his own gym inside. He has a panic room. If we breach the door, he retreats to the panic room and deletes everything. Hard drives, phones, documents. Then he calls the French police and claims he's a victim of a home invasion. By the time we get through the reinforced steel of the panic room, the GIGN will be rappelling down the side of the building." Sarah studied the layout. "So we can't go in heavy. We need him to open the door." "He won't open the door," Simon countered. He's the architect. He knows every trick. He designed the security protocols for half the cells in Gaza. If the doorbell rings and he's not expecting it, he arms the system. Then we don't ring the doorbell, Aiton said. We make him want to leave. We have to turn his sanctuary into a trap. We have to make the hole uncomfortable enough that the rat comes to the surface. The plan they devised was psychological warfare. They wouldn't attack the man. They would attack his environment. They would manipulate his reality until he doubted his own safety protocols. It was a technique refined over decades of psychological operations, gaslighting on an industrial scale. They spent the next 3 days watching. They hacked into the building's CCTV system, looping the feed so the concierge saw nothing but an empty hallway while operatives planted microcameras and audio bugs in the corridor outside the penthouse. They mapped the comings and goings of every neighbor. They learned the rhythm of the building, the cleaning crews, the mail delivery, the lovers' quarrels in 4B. They needed to know the architect's routine, even if that routine was simply moving from the bedroom to the living room. The thermal cameras they aimed at the windows from a building across the street showed a ghostly heat signature moving, pacing back and forth, a caged animal. He's restless, Sarah noted, watching the monitor. He's waiting for something. Or someone, Aiton replied. The architect's apartment was a masterpiece of isolation. Ibrahim al-Majid had spent millions of embezzled dollars ensuring that he could command his empire of terror without ever stepping outside. The windows were bulletproof. The walls were soundproofed. The air was filtered to prevent chemical attacks, a fear he had developed after hearing rumors of toxins used by foreign agents. Inside, al-Majid lived a life of suspended animation. He woke at 6 a.m., prayed, and then spent hours on his encrypted terminals, moving money, authorizing shipments, and reviewing personnel files. He treated his operation like a multinational corporation. He was the CEO of violence. But the isolation was eating at him. The psychological profile Mossad had built was accurate. He was a man who craved control, and total isolation is the ultimate loss of control, because you cannot see what is coming for you. He kept a loaded pistol on his desk and checked the security monitors every 10 minutes. On the 4th day of surveillance, the Mossad team made their first move. It was subtle. They hacked the building's climate control system. It wasn't a dramatic shutoff that would alert a technician. It was a gradual adjustment. They raised the temperature in the penthouse by 2 degrees, then lowered the humidity. It was just enough to be irritating, to make sleep difficult, to create a low-level physical stress that would erode his patience. Next, they targeted his communications. They didn't jam him. That would signal an attack. Instead, they introduced latency. His internet connection slowed down. Packets were dropped. Encrypted calls dropped audio for fractions of a second. For a man whose survival depended on information, this was torture. It made him check his equipment, question his service provider, and worry that his digital shield was failing. Then came the noise. The team rented the apartment directly above the penthouse. They didn't throw parties. They used specialized audio equipment to transmit low-frequency vibrations into the floor, infrasound. It was below the threshold of conscious hearing, but it creates a sense of unease, nausea, and anxiety in the human brain. It is the frequency of fear. Down in the penthouse, al-Majid began to pace more frantically. He felt the walls closing in. He couldn't sleep. He couldn't work. His sanctuary was turning against him. He's fraying, Simon reported from the command post. Thermal shows him up at 3 a.m. He's checking the locks repeatedly. Good, Aiton said. Now we introduce the threat. They fabricated a digital breadcrumb. Using the access they had gained to the local cellular network, they sent a wrong number text message to his burner phone. It was simple, innocuous, but designed to trigger his paranoia. It read, "The package is ready. Meet at the usual spot." To a normal person, it was spam. To the architect, who lived in a world of codes and dead drops, it was a terrifying ambiguity. Was it a mistake? Was it a message from one of his cells? Or was it a signal that he had been compromised? He spent hours analyzing the number. It led nowhere, a dead end. But the seed was planted. He began to suspect that his location was known, that his hole was no longer a secret. The team watched as he packed a go bag. He was preparing to run. But he hesitated. Leaving the apartment was dangerous. Staying was becoming impossible. He was trapped in the indecision loop that the operatives had engineered. Aiton watched the monitors. He's almost there. We need one final push. We need to make him open the door. While the psychological pressure cooker was doing its work on the architect, the physical preparations for the breach were underway. The team had to solve the problem of the lock. It was a biometric system, requiring a fingerprint and a key card. Sarah took the lead on this. She had been tracking the concierge, a young man named Pierre who handled the architect's deliveries. Pierre had a master key card for the building. He was innocent, just a worker doing his job, but in the world of intelligence, innocence is just another vulnerability to be exploited. They didn't mug him. They didn't threaten him. They bumped into him at a local cafe. Sarah, playing the role of a confused tourist, spilled coffee on his jacket. In the flurry of apologies and napkins, she used a portable cloner to skim the RFID data from the keycard in his pocket. It took 3 seconds. "I have the code," she radioed to the team. "Fingerprint?" Aiton asked. "Working on it." Getting the architect's fingerprint was impossible since he never left the room. But they didn't need his fingerprint. They needed the concierge's. The concierge had access to the service mode of the lock. When Sarah had handed Pierre a napkin to clean his jacket, she had handed him a specially treated surface that retained high-resolution latent prints. Back at the safe house, the technical specialist David went to work. He used a polymer gel to lift the print from the napkin and transfer it to a synthetic latex mold. Within 2 hours, they had a prosthetic fingertip that would fool the scanner. They had the key. They had the print. But they still had the issue of the chain and the internal deadbolt that couldn't be opened electronically. "We need him to unlock the deadbolt from the inside," Simon said, cleaning his suppressed pistol, a precaution, though the mission parameters strictly forbade a shootout if possible. "How do we get him to do that?" "We become the delivery he's expecting," Aiton said. They had intercepted his grocery order. He had ordered supplies for the week. The delivery was scheduled for Friday at 4 p.m. The plan was audacious. They would intercept the delivery driver, replace him with one of their own, and get to the door. But the architect never opened the door for deliveries. He had them left in the hallway. He would check the camera, wait for the driver to leave, and then open the door to retrieve the bags. "We have to change the protocol," Aiton said. "We have to make him open the door while we are there." They decided to use a package bomb ruse, but in reverse. They would dress as a bomb disposal unit. "No, too loud. Police? Too risky. Maintenance," Sarah suggested. "A gas leak. It's the one thing that forces evacuation. It overrides security protocols because the threat is immediate and physical." "He might just seal the room," Simon argued. "He has air filtration." "Not if we pump mercaptan into the hallway," David said. Mercaptan is the chemical added to natural gas to give it that rotten egg smell. It triggers a primal flight response in humans. If he smells gas, strong gas, right outside his door, and we cut the power to his filtration system, he has to open the door or risk an explosion. It was risky. If he panicked and triggered a self-destruct or started shooting through the door, the operation would fail. But it was the best option they had. "We go tonight," Aiton said. Friday night. The building is quiet. The streets are empty. The team moved into position. They wore maintenance overalls over their tactical gear. They carried toolboxes that concealed submachine guns and stun grenades. They looked like weary workers coming to fix a problem, invisible to the casual eye. At 02:06 a.m., the hallway outside the penthouse was silent. The carpet runner dampened the footsteps of the 4 operatives as they approached the heavy oak door. David knelt by the ventilation duct near the floor. He inserted a thin tube connected to a canister of concentrated mercaptan. "Injecting," he whispered into his comms. The smell was instant and overpowering. It smelled like the earth was rotting. Inside the penthouse, the architect was awake, as the team knew he would be. He was sitting at his desk when the scent hit him. His eyes widened. He stood up, sniffing the air. Gas. Massive leak. He ran to the climate control panel to boost the filtration, but the panel was dead. The team had cut the power to the HVAC unit from the roof. The air inside the apartment began to stagnate. The smell grew stronger, seeping under the door jamb. Panic, cold and sharp, spiked in his chest. An explosion in a confined space like this would turn his fortress into a pressure cooker. He would be incinerated. He grabbed his go bag. He grabbed his pistol. He moved to the door. He checked the security camera. The monitor showed the hallway. It was empty. The team had looped the footage again. He saw nothing but the quiet corridor. No police, no assassins. Just a gas leak. It seemed like a mundane disaster, an accident of infrastructure. He hesitated. His training screamed at him to stay inside, but the smell was choking him now. He had to get out. He had to get to the stairwell. Outside, Eitan stood pressed against the wall, inches from the doorframe, outside the camera's blind spot. He held a stun device, a modified cattle prod capable of delivering 50,000 volts. Simon stood on the other side, ready to breach. Inside, the architect unlocked the deadbolt. Clack. He undid the chain. Rattle. He turned the handle. The door cracked open. The architect peered out, pistol raised, eyes scanning for danger. He saw the empty hallway. He took a step forward. Now, Eitan whispered. Simon kicked the door. It slammed into the architect, knocking him off balance. Before he could raise his weapon, Eitan lunged. He didn't shoot. He jammed the stun device into the architect's neck and pulled the trigger. The sound was a dry crackle, like bacon frying. The architect, the man who had orchestrated the deaths of hundreds, who had built a career on the suffering of innocents, convulsed. His muscles locked. His eyes rolled back. He dropped to the carpet, twitching, helpless. He wasn't dead. Mossad didn't want him dead. Not yet. They wanted him broken. Simon kicked the pistol away. Sarah and David rushed in, securing the hallway. They dragged him back inside his own apartment and kicked the door shut. The architect lay on the floor of his sanctuary, looking up at 4 figures standing over him. They weren't police. They weren't French authorities. They wore masks, but their eyes were cold and familiar. He knew instantly who they were. "Welcome to the party, Ibrahim," Eitan said in flawless Arabic. They didn't kill him. They stripped him of his clothes to check for wires or hidden blades. They injected him with a sedative, a cocktail designed to keep him pliable but conscious, chemically stripping away his will to resist. This wasn't a capture for a trial. This was an interrogation. They turned his living room into a field processing center. They ripped the hard drives from his computers. They emptied his safe. They took every scrap of paper. The architect tried to speak, but his tongue felt thick, heavy. He was the master of logistics, the man who moved armies of shadows, and now he was lying in his underwear on a Persian rug, drooling, while strangers dismantled his life piece by piece. "We're going to take a trip," Eitan told him, leaning close. "You like tunnels? You like holes? We have a special one waiting for you." They dressed him in a tracksuit. They put a hat on his head and sunglasses over his eyes. They put him in a wheelchair, posing him as an invalid relative. It was the same disguise tradecraft used to smuggle agents out of hostile territory. They wheeled him out of his fortress, into the elevator, and through the lobby. The concierge, Pierre, waved at them, thinking it was a late-night medical transport. They loaded him into the back of the van. The architect of terror was leaving his hole, not as a martyr, not in a blaze of glory, but slumped in a wheelchair, drugged and helpless. But the night was not over. The extraction was the most dangerous part. They had the prize, but they still had to get him out of France. And the architect had one final contingency plan that even he didn't know about. A dead man's switch embedded in his server that had just failed to receive its hourly check-in. Deep beneath the floorboards of the Parisian penthouse, inside a server rack cooled by its own dedicated air conditioning unit, a timer hit 0. Ibrahim al-Majid was a man who trusted no one, not even the silence he had built around himself. He had configured a heartbeat protocol, a piece of code that required him to enter a 64-character alphanumeric string every 60 minutes. When the Mossad team dragged him out, pumped full of sedatives and slumping in a wheelchair, 61 minutes passed. The server didn't explode. It didn't sound a siren. It simply sent 3 packets of data. The first went to a bank in the Cayman Islands, liquidating his operational accounts and moving the funds to an inaccessible trust. The second went to a cloud server in Russia, wiping his archives. The third, and most dangerous, went to a pager sitting on a bedside table in a cheap hotel room in the suburb of Saint-Denis. The pager belonged to a man named Qasim. Qasim wasn't an intelligence officer. He wasn't a logistician. He was a cleaner. He was the architect's final insurance policy. A freelance contractor paid a retainer to ensure that if Al-Majid was ever taken, he wouldn't be taken alive. Qasim woke up instantly. The code on the pager was 9999 red. It meant the architect had missed a check-in. It meant the fortress had fallen. Qasim sat up, the neon light from the street casting long shadows across his face. He didn't panic. He reached under the bed and pulled out a duffel bag. Inside was a subcompact submachine gun, 3 magazines, and a police scanner. He picked up his phone and dialed a number that routed through 4 different countries before connecting to a surveillance van parked 2 blocks from the architect's apartment. "Status," Qasim said. The voice on the other end was rough, confused. "We see nothing. The building is quiet. A medical transport van left 4 minutes ago. That's it." "Follow the van," Qasim ordered. "The architect is in it." "Are you sure?" "The dead man's switch just tripped. If they have him, they're moving him. Don't engage. Just track. I'm coming." Back in the extraction van, Aiton sat in the passenger seat, his eyes scanning the side mirrors. The van was a nondescript commercial vehicle, chosen for its ability to blend into the late-night traffic of Paris. In the back, Sarah and Simon monitored the architect's vitals. "Heart rate is elevated," Sarah whispered, checking the portable monitor. "The sedative is fighting his adrenaline. He's terrified, even in his sleep." "Good," Aiton muttered. "Let him have nightmares." David, driving the van, tapped the dashboard. "We have a tail. Gray sedan, 2 cars back. It turned with us on Rue de Rivoli." Aiton didn't turn around. He adjusted the mirror. "Is it police?" "No," David said. "Civilians, or pretending to be. They're driving too well, keeping distance, staying in the blind spot." "The dead man's switch," Aiton realized. "We triggered it. The architect had a cleanup crew on standby." This was the variable they hadn't accounted for, the speed of the response. They were supposed to be ghosts, but now they were being hunted by men who didn't care about diplomatic incidents or collateral damage. "Change of plan," Aiton announced. "We can't go to the safe house. If we lead them there, we burn the whole network. We need to go straight to the extraction point." "The boat isn't there yet," Simon argued from the back. "The Blue Marlin is still 2 hours out from Marseille." "Then we drive fast," Aiton said. "David, get us to the highway. Lose the tail, but don't make it look like we're running. Make them think we're just bad drivers." The drive south from Paris is usually a romantic journey through the heart of France. For the operatives of Operation Iron Net, it was a 6-hour gauntlet of paranoia. They switched vehicles in a parking garage in Lyon. It was a pre-arranged contingency, a standard tradecraft maneuver designed to break surveillance chains. They left the commercial van and transferred the architect, still unconscious, into the back of a luxury SUV with diplomatic plates. The plates were high-quality forgeries, identifying the vehicle as belonging to the embassy of a South American nation. "He's waking up," Sarah warned as they merged onto the A7 autoroute. Al-Majid groaned. His eyes fluttered open, unfocused and bloodshot. The interior of the SUV was dark, the windows tinted to opacity. He tried to move his hands and found them zip-tied to the frame of the seat. He tried to speak, but his mouth was dry as sand. "Water," he croaked. Aiton turned from the front seat. He held up a bottle of water but didn't give it to him. "You're confused, Ibrahim. You think you're dreaming. You think you're going to wake up in your penthouse with your air filters and your bulletproof glass." The architect blinked, the fog of the drugs slowly receding. He looked at Aiton, then at Sarah sitting next to him with a syringe in her hand. The realization hit him like a physical blow. The smell of the mercaptan gas, the stun gun, the wheelchair. "Who are you?" Al-Majid whispered. "You know who we are," Aiton said softly. "We are the ones you thought you could outsmart. We are the ones who don't forget." "You can't take me," Al-Majid stammered, his voice gaining a shred of its old arrogance. "I am a political refugee. I have rights. The French government will not allow this." Eitan laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. The French government thinks you're a retired antique dealer, and right now the French government thinks we are diplomats heading to a conference in Nice. You don't exist, Ibrahim. You erased yourself so well that no one will even notice you're gone. David interrupted from the driver's seat. The tail is back. They picked us up again. They must have a tracker on the architect himself. The team froze. They had scanned his clothes. They had scanned his body. But they hadn't scanned inside his body. Subdermal, Simon said, cursing. He has a chip. Like a dog. The architect smiled weakly. My friends are coming. They won't let you take me to Tel Aviv. They will burn this car to the ground before they let me talk. Eitan looked at the GPS. They were still an hour from the coast. The gray sedan was a mile back, joined now by a motorcycle. He's right, Eitan said. They aren't here to rescue him. They're here to silence him. They know that if we get him to Israel, he spills everything. The accounts, the names, the safe houses. He's a liability. Eitan pulled a specialized device from his tactical vest. A frequency jammer. He dialed it to the frequency range used by RFID and GPS trackers. Jamming it. But they know our direction. We need to get off the highway. Where? David asked. The old service road. Eitan pointed to the map. It runs parallel to the coast. It's winding, dangerous. It buys us time. As the SUV swerved off the highway and onto the dark winding roads of Provence, the atmosphere inside the vehicle shifted. It was no longer just an extraction. It was a mobile interrogation. Eitan knew they needed to break the architect now. If the cleanup crew caught them, Al-Majid needed to understand that his friends were the real danger. You think they're coming to save you? Eitan asked, leaning over the seat. Qasim? Is that who it is? The cleaner? Al-Majid flinched at the name. We know about Qasim. Eitan lied. We know he gets paid a bonus for every loose end he ties up. You're the ultimate loose end, Ibrahim. You think you're the architect? To them, you're just a hard drive that needs to be smashed. You're lying, Al-Majid spat. I am the movement. Without me, the funding dries up. The funding is already gone, Eitan said, glancing at his phone where a secure message had just come in from headquarters. Your dead man's switch worked perfectly. It liquidated your accounts. The movement has your money. They don't need the man anymore. This was the knife twist. The architect had designed the system to protect his assets, but in doing so, he had made himself expendable. If the money was safe and the archives were wiped, what value did his flesh and blood hold? They will kill you. Eitan continued, his voice calm, reasonable. They will put an RPG into this car and incinerate us all. Your only chance to live, is to help us evade them. Why would I trust you? Because we don't want you dead, Sarah said, speaking for the first time. Her voice was clinical. We want what's in your head. We want the maps. We want the names. Dead. You are useless to us. Alive. You are a gold mine. We are the only ones in this equation who have a vested interest in keeping your heart beating. The SUV hit a pothole, jarring them. Behind them, headlights swept across the trees. The motorcycle was gaining. They're close, David said. 2 minutes out. Al-Majid looked out the rear window. He saw the single headlight of the motorcycle cutting through the darkness. He knew Qasim's methods. Qasim didn't negotiate. The tracker, Al-Majid whispered. It's in my shoulder, left deltoid. We jammed it, Simon said. It has a backup passive mode, Al-Majid said, fear finally breaking through his arrogance. It reflects the signal from their scanner. You have to cut it out. Eitan looked at Sarah. She was the team's medic. She nodded. Do it, Eitan ordered. There was no anesthetic. There was no time for sterility. Sarah pulled a scalpel from her kit. She ripped the sleeve of Al-Majid's tracksuit. Hold him, she said. Simon pinned the architect against the door. The architect bit down on his lip, whimpering as the blade went in. It was a brutal, bloody piece of field surgery. Sarah dug into the muscle, found the small glass capsule, and popped it out. She rolled down the window and threw the bloody chip into the ditch. David, turn right, Eitan ordered. Now. The SUV swung onto a dirt track leading into a vineyard. Behind them, the motorcycle and the sedan continued straight. following the signal of the discarded chip. For a moment, there was silence in the car, broken only by the heavy breathing of the architect, who was clutching his bleeding shoulder. "You see?" Eitan said, handing him a bandage. "We are partners now." Chapter 10. The Maritime Extract. They reached the coast at 4:30 a.m. The rendezvous point was a small private marina near Cassis. The Blue Marlin wasn't a warship. It was a 60-foot luxury yacht, registered to a shell company in Gibraltar. This was a page taken directly from the capture of Mordecai Vanunu. A private yacht is the perfect cover, slow, unassuming, and invisible to the high-stakes radar of international naval patrols. The team moved quickly. The SUV was abandoned, wiped clean of prints. They hurried the architect, now weak from blood loss and shock, down the dock. The captain of the Blue Marlin was a man named Ari. He didn't ask questions. He started the engines as soon as their boots hit the deck. "Cast off," Eitan ordered. "We need to be in international waters before sunrise." As the yacht pulled away, the lights of France began to recede. But the danger wasn't over. The cleanup crew would realize their mistake soon. They would check the marinas. The architect sat in the main cabin, wrapped in a blanket. He was shivering. The reality of his situation was settling in. He was on a boat, heading into the open Mediterranean, surrounded by the most dangerous intelligence operatives on Earth. "Where are we going?" he asked. "Home," Eitan said. "I have no home," Al-Majid replied. "You took it. We're going to Israel, Ibrahim. You're going to see the country you tried to destroy. You're going to see the faces of the people you wanted to kill." The journey took 4 days. It was a slow, agonizing passage. The team took shifts guarding him. They didn't interrogate him violently. They didn't need to. The confinement, the motion of the sea, the total loss of control, it broke him down layer by layer. They used the time to debrief him gently. They asked about small things: logistics, bank account structures, encryption keys. Al-Majid, realizing that his own side had tried to kill him, began to talk. At first, it was just to buy goodwill, a better meal, a painkiller for his shoulder. But once the dam cracked, the water rushed through. He spoke of the supply lines through Sudan. He spoke of the chemical weapon precursors stored in warehouses in Syria. He spoke of the corrupted officials in European ports who looked the other way for a bribe. He was pouring out the blueprints of the terror network. He was dismantling his own life's work, sentence by sentence, while the yacht cut through the blue waves. Chapter 11. The Arrival. On the 4th night, a new shape appeared on the radar. It was a massive shadow against the stars. The INS Hanit, an Israeli Navy corvette, was waiting for them 50 miles off the coast of Haifa. The transfer was conducted in silence. A Zodiac boat ferried the team and their prisoner from the yacht to the warship. As Al-Majid climbed the ladder onto the steel deck of the corvette, he saw the Israeli flag snapping in the wind. He collapsed. His legs simply gave out. It wasn't physical exhaustion. It was the crushing weight of finality. He had spent 20 years hiding in the shadows, building a myth of invincibility, and now he was just a man in a tracksuit, shivering on the deck of an enemy ship. He was taken below decks to a secure holding cell. Eitan went with him. "This is the end of the line, Ibrahim," Eitan said. "No more hotels, no more penthouses, no more hiding." Al-Majid looked up, his eyes hollow. "What happens now? A trial? You put me in a glass cage like Eichmann?" "Maybe," Eitan said. "Or maybe you just disappear into a prison cell for the rest of your life. The red page is filed. You are officially neutralized. The world thinks you died in a gas explosion in Paris. We arranged that story. A tragic accident. No body found." The architect stared at the metal wall. "I am a ghost." "You always were," Eitan said. "We just made it official." Chapter 12. The Silence. The interrogation of Ibrahim Al-Majid lasted for 6 months. The intelligence he provided dismantled terror cells across 3 continents. It stopped 3 planned bombing campaigns. It exposed financial networks that had operated for a decade. He was never put on public trial. There were no cameras. There was no grand speech from the dock. Israel decided that giving him a platform was dangerous. His punishment was silence. He was held in a high-security wing of a prison in the Negev desert. his existence known only to a handful of wardens and intelligence officers. In the end, the architect of terror was defeated not by a missile or a bomb, but by patience. He was defeated by the slow, grinding machinery of a state that refused to forget. He was defeated by the realization that he was a coward who built his empire on the suffering of others, but broke the moment his own comfort was threatened. Back in Paris, the apartment was rented to a new tenant. The concierge Pierre sometimes told the story of the strange gas leak and the eccentric tenant who vanished in the night. He never knew that he had shaken hands with mass murder. The operation, Iron Net, was archived. The file was closed, the red page was turned, but the machinery never stops. Somewhere in Tel Aviv, a printer is humming. A new name is being typed onto a fresh sheet of paper. A new target is being identified. A new team is packing their bags. Because the war in the shadows has no end. There is always another architect. There is always another hole. And there is always someone waiting in the dark to drag them out. If this deep dive into the psychology of a capture and the tradecraft of the world's most elite intelligence agency kept you on the edge of your seat, make sure you are subscribed. We don't just tell stories, we expose the methodology of power. Hit the like button if you believe that justice sometimes needs to be delivered in the dark. Share this video with someone who thinks they understand how the world works. And tell me in the comments, was the lifetime of silence a fitting punishment, or should the architect have faced a public trial for the world to see? Until the next file is opened, stay vigilant. The shadows are watching.